Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome back to the Cubase Fundamentals course. And this is the last episode in this series. We've met the brief. We've covered the majority of the really important core features of the application. And I understand there's an awful lot to go. Cubase is an absolutely vast subject. From this point onwards, I'm going to start doing individual laser-targeted deep dive videos into some of those aspects of functionality that haven't been covered in the overview course. If you've enjoyed this series and you want to help support me in the making of future content, please consider the Patreon link in the description below. Alternatively, you can click join to become a YouTube channel member. I regularly post messages to my patrons and YouTube channel members asking for their input. And several of the episodes that I've made recently have been a direct consequence of responses to those requests, so check out those links. Okay, let's get this mix finished. We've got the keyboards and vocals to add in, and this is going to be largely a rinse and repeat exercise from stuff that we've already dealt with, so I'll try to be as brief as possible. We don't want to over-egg this pudding. So the first thing that I'm going to bring in is the keys, and I'll do them one at a time. Set myself a loop to deal with the first two. Obviously the source solo comes later, but we can get the first two in the mix. When I was prepping for this episode, actually I noticed that I hadn't yet plugged in the vocal reverb, the choir into the vocal reverb. So let's do that. Select our 4 tracks, Q-Link, and send to the vocal reverb. Pull it down to somewhere reasonable, and let's see what that sounds like. Turn Q-Link off. Let's have a couple of them really hard left and right. This is an interesting point actually. I was just about to say, obviously you'd spend an awful lot longer on this mix if you were doing it for real, but actually there is a lot to be said for doing things as quickly as possible. I've definitely found myself in recent months spending too long on mixes and just listening to them to death and really losing enthusiasm. So by the time I got to the end product and I'd finished the song, I just couldn't really hear it properly anymore. So I'm very actively trying to mix more quickly these days and trying to find that balance where you don't rush, but you also don't burn yourself out is really important. I can't overstress how you want to try to keep your ears as fresh as possible. That's fine. Let's listen to this solo. Now, can you hear all that depth in the bass sound of the source solo? Let's listen. Look. So all of this, see how busy it is in the lower frequencies? That's getting in the way of the kick drum and the bass. So we want to get rid of a lot of that. The solo is supposed to be focused in the higher frequencies. We really don't need it to be that bassy. So let's get a loop around that. Don't need that long tail. I'm just going to side out a load of this stuff. I also want to accentuate some of those upper frequencies. You can basically just pick the EQ curve up and it will auto select one of the bands for you. choose how steep you want your cue to be, and then we'll basically salt to taste. Pull out some of that mud. It's a much cleaner sound. The one thing that we haven't done in this project so far, and just for giggles I'll do a little bit of it. Let's say we wanted to do some slider riding, some mixer riding on this solo. Put it in right. And now what I'm basically going to do is get the song playing, and I mean I have a CC121 here, so basically if I was doing it for real I would use the slider, but I'll use my mouse just to kind of demonstrate more visually what's going on here. But you just basically put little subtle volume changes, and it only has to be a couple of dB, not really perceptible. But if you do this over the course of the whole song, it acquires a kind of a greater dynamic range and just makes things feel a little bit less static. So I'll just do an example of that over the course of the solo. So you just saw me pull back at the end as the solo was tailing out, where it does those frequency sweeps. I've always thought it was a little bit loud. So that was one of the things that I was pulling back on. Now, let's say we decided that we want to reduce even more, attenuate even more volume than that. No problem. So we'll really zoom in on this. I'm going to turn right automation off now. We're done with the automation. So we literally just press play and then played with the volume slider on the mixer, and we drew our automation curve in, and here you can see it. But let's say we want to accentuate that stuff at the end. So we'll pick this up, and if we hover in the right hand corner, you've got tilt. And now I can pick that up and tilt that entire curve down. I obviously just need to extend it a little bit. I don't want it to spring back up while the sound is still going on. So I'm going to pick that node up and just drag it off into infinity. The solo is done by this point. It doesn't matter where this note lives. I can put it wherever I want. But what I'm most interested in doing is just tilting that graph down a little bit extra. Too much on the end, just got a little bit carried away there. Pull them back up, turn grid mode off. Keep snapping to the grid if you're in grid mode, obviously. And one final listen. Okay, the other thing I want to do during the course of that solo is get the choir out of the way. Because that solo is the dominant sound, I don't want the choir to be kind of competing in that frequency range. And there's any number of ways that I can do it, but I choose, because why not, to use the vocal master track. So the solo starts at bar 21 and finishes around 29-ish. So what we're going to do is turn the grid on, because it starts at exactly 21. So I can get my range tool out, and the master track itself is essentially a glorified volume control. So I can pick that entire thing up and just slice a bit of vocals out, a bit of choir. Too much. Try that again. because that source sound is quite dramatic when it comes in. It grabs all of your attention. You don't need to be hearing the choir anymore. So at any given point in the mix, the most important question, one of the most important questions to be asking yourself is, what are the things you want to direct the listener towards? It's your decision. You're the director. You're pointing the listener in the direction of the things that you think are most interesting in the song at the point at that given moment. Let's call it done. Let's say we want to output this song as is. We're going to release it on YouTube or Spotify or wherever. They have a -14 LUFS target, which basically means any song that's globally louder than -14 loudness units is going to get attenuated. They're literally just going to drag the entire thing down. So we want our song to be as close as possible to -14 LUFS. Now, I use a third-party product to do that. I use Isotope's Ozone, which I just think is the absolute bee's knees. But I'm trying to stay inside the Steinberg world, so I'm not going to use Ozone, but ordinarily I would just basically stick the maximizer on the stereo bus. It does that job very well indeed. In terms of the Steinberg solution, what we're going to do is we're going to use the stereo bus. I'm going to move the supervision down a little bit to give me some space above, and I'm going to put a limiter on the track. So what this is basically going to do is it's going to allow me to control very simply the overall level of the song. If it's a little bit quiet, the limiter, I can use the limiter to boost the volume, but it's never going to clip. It'll always just calm all of those aggressive transients down, or the loudest bits of the song, and you'll see the gain reduction. Anything that's red, where the gain reduction just dips the song down, is the limiter just pulling back on the volume. Having been through the limiter, we can then get a master readout on supervision. So if I set this meter, reset the meter, and play the entire song, we're aiming for an integrated measurement of about -14. Just before I do the full run through, actually, one final thing that I'm going to do is pick what I think is probably the loudest part of the song. This first bar of source solo has the highest impact, so I'll pull the stereo out right down. It doesn't matter what this stereo out slider is set to, because these meters are operating pre-fader. And I'm going to get to the stage where the master bus is hot but not peaking, not clipping. In fact, we're pretty close. That's about as far as I want to push that. So that's arbitrarily finding the loudest point of the song and just making sure the master bus isn't clipping. Now I can set the entire thing going, reset my meters, and we'll come back in a minute and a half and see what the overall volume was. -17.4. So we've got about 3.5 dB to catch up if we want to get to this kind of, perfect loudness level. You don't need to do anything really. You could just output it at that, but it is a little bit quiet. You can also see that we've got a true peak clip here. That'll be the kick drums. I'm just going to tiny adjustments on the kick drums, just pull them down a tiny little bit. So I'm going to give a 3.5 dB boost on the limiter. I'm just going to pull my output down by a smidgen to -0.3-ish, just to get nowhere near the true peak setting, and rinse and repeat. I'll give it another run through with those settings. And we're pretty much there. -14.8 is very close, so a tiny bit more of a boost would fix that. I also noticed while the song was playing, there were a couple of moments where the master bus just clipped. So I would probably bring the rhythm master down a tiny hair, a little extra boost on the limiter. But all of this stuff is very, very fine tuning now. Just trying to get that integrated value as close to -14 as we possibly can. Again, let's call that done. What I'm going to do now is fix the fade out on the choir, which I never did. Really easy way to do that. is that. Tiny bit longer, and bring that in a little bit. There we go. Now I want to choose exactly how long I want the song to be. There. And now I can Control 2 to set the locator point. Scroll to the beginning of the song, find the absolute start, and just make the beginning of the song very slightly in front of that. So if I press play now, it's just that tiny, tiny gap. I don't like to have samples right at the very beginning. That should be plenty. So I've got my locators set up correctly now. Go to Export Audio Mixdown, and we're doing a master render. So I'm going to choose the single output, which is going to pick the stereo out. I'm going to output in MP3 format, 44.1 kilohertz, 320 kilobits per second, so all perfectly normal stuff. After export, I don't want to do anything, don't want to create an audio track. I'm just exporting this as a file, as a physical file. And it's going to go in the Mixdown folder, that's fine. I'm going to set my stereo out volume to 0, because that's basically it's the full mixed version of the song, exactly as is coming from the stereo out bus. And off we go. And here it is, project1.mp3. And now that's basically just playing in my player. Mixed to the right levels, sounds perfectly fine in the company of any other music. And we're done. Hope you enjoyed the series. If you did, please hit the like button. Really helps me out with the YouTube stuff. I'll see you for the deep dives. Thanks a lot.